Welcome to this edition of Strata Originals. Today we have James Williams, who is a treat. We're going to hear about Coca-Cola and the Olympics. We're going to hear about innovation inside of a company. James is a global executive. He's a CMO. He's a board advisor, consultant, transformation in teams. And he really focuses and he loves to do high-performing teams, which makes sense when it comes to sports and Coca-Cola in the Olympics. So welcome, James.
Hey, great to be here and looking forward to a good chat.
It will be. I think everyone's in for a treat. Can you just start by talking to us a little about would you say that Coca-Cola was kind of that centerpiece of what you built up to in your career? And then it's been sort of before Coca-Cola and then after Coca-Cola because of what you achieved?
Yeah, I definitely feel that it became a big part of it. And actually, before I joined Coca-Cola, I worked in marketing agencies here in the UK. And I had a number of different clients, but one of them then became Coke, which is how I then got into being part of the business. So yeah, it definitely became a large part of my life. And then cottoning that with, or including that with moving around the world, living in Brazil, living in Japan, being part of Coke. I think everyone just became that's what I was. It was James who worked at Coke, or James who worked at Coke and on the Olympics. So it became a very big part of my life, definitely.
Do you agree or disagree that marketers are born and not built?
I think, some people are born with a certain sense and talent in certain ways that they look at stuff and the way that they do stuff. But I also think a lot of people can learn stuff. I've always thought this about leadership and stuff like that. When I talk about leadership isn't always inherently something that people are born with, but you can really learn how to be a better leader. But it's the same with marketing. I think it's a lot of those things. There is always going to be a certain element of talent that I think comes with that. And that's about perspectives, that's about experience, it's about a whole world of different things that I think play into it. But yeah, I think some people are born with a natural talent for things. But I also think you can learn and grow whatever talents you really want if you focus on it and you dedicate it to it.
I agree. I do think that, like you said, I think some people are born marketers, and which doesn't mean that they're not also born leaders. It's just, and some people are born accountants and maybe, CFO kind of people. We had this discussion about neurodivergence, but what were some of the challenges when you were growing up?
I think a lot of the challenges when I grew up and back then, when I was tested, it was called it was dyslexia, but it was a learning difficulty. It didn't really have a name back then. You were just why aren't you in the top sets? And I'd kind of grown up with two very, very smart brothers who had been high achievers. And so when you follow that through, that's always difficult because essentially dyslexia and a lot of the neurodiversities don't really work within the current education system. So it's because everyone's taught to do exactly the same thing, learn the same way, and that kind of stuff. So that was always a challenge. And I think there's different ways that plays out. I think one of it is you then shy away from the academia because I didn't like a lot of that, and I you don't see rewards with exams. So you've got to find different ways to look for success.
Yeah.
And that would then hopefully build confidence. So I think definitely in my early parts of my life, it was tough. Going through that is always difficult because you don't conform. You don't fit into the nice little box where you're getting the good grades, doing the right things, and you don't understand why. And I think even, I had a reading age of a kind of 9-year-old or something like that, which when you're 16 probably isn't the best thing you're going to hear. So I think all of that, but then it forms and it drives a lot of the grit and the determination because you want to improve and you want to do different things, but you find different ways to approach it and get past those problems.
And I think that's probably where innovation comes into your DNA a little bit, because you had to find ways around, especially when you get into the working world, had to find ways around, large documents or books that you wanted to read, right?
Yeah, I think definitely one of the things is it comes out is that problem solving. So you find whatever the problem is that comes towards you, I have a huge curiosity to how can I find a way to solve this or find a way, and that's played out in a lot of my career and especially now with a lot of the advisory stuff or the investments that I make is like this is a great solution for people or for the planet or something like that. And I think it's also about sometimes challenging the status quo. I think part of that one of the things I talk about is this discomfort. So sitting with a discomfort, which I grew up with naturally because you sat in a classroom and felt hugely out of place. And the discomfort of that, of not knowing how this all works. And I think then as I went through, and this drove a lot of the innovation and the stuff throughout my career because it was looking at it in a very different way, which did breed a lot of success. It was like, actually, you can do it like this, and this. I used to always say the worst thing a boss could say to me was, yeah, you can't do that. And it's like a red rag to a bull. It's like, that's not going to work. And it's like, no, I can make this work. And it was always one of those things. And I think that's part of it is it's that kind of drive to go, actually, I need to look at this in a different way. I need to problem solve. And it was a bit like things like the pandemic. I mean, the pandemic throws, and suddenly you're in a world of this is all new. And actually, I think a lot of the neurodivergent kind of thinking really came to fruition then because there were people going, right, we can do this, this, and this. And I think there were a lot of people that were kind of stuck that didn't know, okay, what do we do now?
Well, right, because we have to find a way around things. So, obviously my challenge wasn't dyslexia, but my challenge is routine and ADHD.
Yeah.
And there's nothing worse you could do to someone with ADHD than make them stay inside for long periods of time in the same room. So there has to be other ways. And so out of that comes a lot of great innovation and ways around things. So you made it through school, you got your first jobs at marketing agencies
Yeah.
and then started working with Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
And so how did that lead to, what level were you at when you went there? And then how did you make your way up to where you were?
So I went in kind of at a brand manager, kind of senior brand manager level, and kind of came into the brand team and the marketing team, which again, you have what I guess is a very consistent way that Coke writes the book on how to do marketing back there, the DNA of marketing and how you do it. And again, so whilst it was working for me to work on a brand, I then moved across to the what was called the brand experience team, which was a lot more of that innovation. It was about how do you look at digital, and this is going back a number of years. So, but it was looking at really different ways to not only connect with consumers, but engage with them, but using data, driving that link between marketing and commercial. And I think it was all those kind of stuff, and that can go from events to sponsorship to all sorts of stuff. And I think that's what I've loved is you can see where the passion points are, you can connect all these dots and drive that return on investment. It's not just about kind of brand love, it's about really connecting those dots. And that's what I learned before I started on the Olympics for 2012, to really embed a lot more of the purpose-driven stuff. So back then it was about very much about CSR and stuff, but actually you can make a difference in people's lives. You can make good increases in volume and value and revenue for a business and still have a good impact on society. And I think that became a real driver. And I think that was when the Olympics and that high performance kind of piece really came to life. So when you see the dedication of what athletes do to perform for one thing and the little pieces that make a difference in their lives, you're like, actually, if I just tweak this, this, and this, that's going to make me better at this. So I think that was definitely my early days at Coke was a big opening. Yeah, it was fantastic. I loved it. I mean, it's one of the greatest brands in the world. So it was definitely that moment where actually I'm really good at connecting those different pieces and then getting the best out of people, understanding what they want to do, understanding where their strengths lie, and really allowing them to run with it. So I think that was that the fairly early part was great.
So was that sort of, what year would that have been?
2012. So 2010 to 2012 was when I kind of grew that team. And the torch relay means that you run around the country for 70 days non-stop with a team of 70 or 65, and just every night there was a different event. We were running around having a great time, young and sleeping about 5 hours a night. So but you're fueled by the emotion and the buzz and the impact that you're having with people's in their lives. So they run along the road with a lit flame that comes from the Temple of Hera in Greece. And then you run around the UK in some of the most iconic places. I mean, I remember when I went to Canada for the 2010 games in Vancouver and saw the torch relay there. And that was when it was spiked, that moment of inspiration and go, this is amazing. So I definitely think, yeah, that was when that kind of piece really kicked off in my life.
That's interesting. So after that, what happened? Like, what was the next launching pad from there? Because so you oversaw the whole torch relay, that kind of thing. And then from there, how did you expand your role, or what was the innovation that happened next?
So then from there, I was moved, I went to Brazil, so to work on the 2016 games. And that was where I was head of the sponsorship and the marketing for the games. So that's about how do you really balance the global kind of messaging plus the local messaging? How do you start to drive that greater ROI on the investment? So how do you get more value out of what you're paying for and things like that? And that means you look at it in a very different way. And that took me up to a kind of VP level, which was phenomenal. But it then again gave me a completely different lens on it when you talk about culture. So you look at this from a different way. So you walk into Brazil, very different culture in the way that they do stuff, not only from a language, but just the hours they keep, the way they approach problems. So Brazil's one of the most creative places in the world, which is phenomenal because they've had so many problems to get over. So you're in that kind of melting pot of problem solving and some really nuts things. So there was the poor versus the rich, timelines, things like that. And it was then where I started to really start to understand how do you add those differences in teams to make them high performing. So the more diverse your team can be, not just in gender or culture or stuff like that, it was more about just this thinking. So actually, the more people I can sit around the table and create this melting pot of thinking will drive a whole new output. And actually, we developed something which was then it was called this new thing, which was then we had a global newsroom, which during the games then took content straight from the field of play and spun it out to 30 odds, 36 different countries in different languages with creative. And we turned that around in a split second, and it never done before. But we created this in a room where you had experiential, you had live music, you had athletes, you had this connection of all the elements from licensing to VIPs. And it was nuts. We literally we had the two best hashtags during the games, which was that's gold in English or Isso era ouro in Portuguese. So that was what was trending globally. So we'd done such a great job because the challenge in Brazil was Brazil didn't really want the Olympics. It also didn't engage with the Olympics because Brazil loves football. So they love the FIFA World Cup, but they've not had a lot of success in the Olympics. So how do you engage an entire country that 2 years before had the FIFA World Cup and they got knocked out in the quarterfinals? So it was that kind of piece is how do you galvanize that? How do you engage an entire country that was going all through all sorts of political dilemmas and challenges? And again, it's about how do you pull a team together to focus on the things that are important and drive the kind of returns that you want. And we again knocked it out the park in terms of some of the results that we got, the people we touched, the engagement scores. So yeah, it was good. It was good. It was hard work, but it was fun.
And then when you came up to leading up to the 2020 Olympics, you had integration on your mind.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one that for me, it was kind of the last two games and the learnings from Vancouver and Russia and then putting it all together in one. So orchestrating what was still to this day Coke's most successful games, because we'd integrated those commercial returns, the marketing engagement, but for me was the ESG piece. So how do you bake in things like recycling and sustainability and diversity, equity, and inclusion into a big global campaign, which actually played out really well because we had the pandemic, we had Black Lives Matter, and essentially you started to see this come together because that was what we were driving. It was like, how can we be more inclusive? It was the Coke Hilltop kind of idea, just, you know, quite a few years later. And to get that and those connecting points between them is quite hard in a business that is very silo based. So it's designed to be siloed. So marketing does one thing, commercial does something else, franchise does something else, and then communications and CSR does something else. So having to link all those pieces together for me was hugely rewarding when we kind of got to the results stage. If you throw in all the challenges we had along the way, both personal and professional, makes for a pretty good 5.5 years, I reckon.
So what was going on in your life other than Coke and the Olympics and everything that you were doing?
So in the end of 2018, 2016, I kind of came down with a bit of an illness, which is called Guillain-Barré syndrome, which then essentially just knocked me, essentially it just paralyzes you to a point where you can't really do much. And the plan was that I was out for a year when the doctors told me. So it was a lot of blood transfusions and things like that. So it was one of those moments, light bulb moments in life where you're like, oh my God, this is, you know, am I going to make us through this? And I think that's when you start to look at the kind of, you look at yourself and you're like, actually, this is about, I need to get through this because the games and what I do are so important that actually I need to be there for my team. I need to be there because they're all on their own kind of thing. So having got through that, we then went through a number of other problems on the team where we had other members having severe injuries through car accidents and things like that. And the adjustment over that period for how a team can adjust around all of these different problems, challenges, and they're very personal. So, you know, you've got very much still the corporate roller coaster going in one direction, the Olympic roller coaster going in the other, and then in the middle you've got this sandwiched piece of a lot of personal challenges and having to support people, which was in some respects it was great because it learnt us to be so much more empathetic, listening to people who have lost their eyesight or stuff like that, understanding how you can communicate with them, how you can engage with them, how you can really start to involve them in a very different way. And I think that in the run up to the pandemic and then the pandemic hitting was just that kind of, you know, it was a tough time where all that comes together. But the best that you see of that is the time and effort you put into building relationships with people, how you take the time to work with people. And that's ultimately where the high performing piece comes in, because actually, if you trust and empower and you take the time to work with people to understand what they can add to this, we had to transform the team from being one of the most disengaged at the beginning of the pandemic to top 2 engaged teams in kind of 6 months to deliver a game so we didn't know whether it was going to be on or not. So you're constantly trying to do that in a country, in a culture that loves to plan within, they like everything to be minute detail of everything's going to happen, and no one knew what was happening. So I think for me it was a lot of learnings, and out of that and out of problems become the innovation. So we started to take what was normally a big experiential thing, we put it all online.
Right.
We took different ways to bring to life diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you could drive awareness of that in a country that wasn't aware of things, simple things like, you know, gender diversity, LGBTQ, all these kind of things. So that's hugely rewarding. And to have the kind of the honor to be able to lead people through that. And the team was about 2,000 people by the time we got to games time,
Wow.
all being tested every day for 45 days. So, which I don't I don't miss that. I'll be honest with you.
When did the games actually happen?
2021.
2021. When you finally got there to Japan, how long before the games was it that you were
So I arrived in 2017. So yeah, so the beginning of 2017 I arrived. In theory, they were going to happen in 2020, but I got an extra year, a bonus year for the pandemic.
And then did you come home for the pandemic?
No, you couldn't. If you left Japan, you wouldn't get back in. So
Oh,
you had to stay. We had to stay in Japan. There was too much of a risk that you wouldn't get back in. So
wow. Yeah. So that's a long time away from your family.
yeah, yeah, it was. And especially when you're kind of doing that thing with everything that's going on, because the whole world was dealing with the pandemic in 15,000 different ways of people who are locked into their houses or not. And I always consider myself to be quite fortunate that in Japan it was a little easier than I heard, at least in the UK, how bad it was and people not being able to go out and things like that. So, but I think that's, that's part of those things in life. You wait for these curveballs.
Yeah. And then, so what happened? What was sort of on the first order of business when you get to Japan and you have like one of the most disengaged teams?
So it's all about, for me, was understanding what were their whys. So how do you really understand um, people's motivations for working on something like the Olympics? So when you look at that, and when you talk about Japan being very much a collective society, so individuals, the nail that stands out gets hammered down, kind of was always a phrase that was used a lot. And so you had to go into them and get, what's your why? Why do you do this? Why do you want to work on the Olympics? What's all that? And what does that relate to your area? So there was a lot of that in building up their own kind of thing, their own confidence in what they did, demonstrating each of their individual skills, and their values and things like that. And then as we started to build up, if that's your foundation, then you start to build this up on piece and piece until you get to the kind of team vision and how we wanted to operate as a team and what were the values of respect that we wanted to have as a team and operate. And it becomes that kind of, what are your operational rules? What's the way that we're going to operate? Doesn't matter what happens around us. We know what we can control. And again, empowering people to do that. And I think that's such a big thing that helps to drive innovation. I think when you start to empower people to go, you know what, an idea can come from anywhere, and you say, let's go with it, and you let people run with it, really does nurture that culture and that safe kind of psychology that actually we can do whatever we want and there's no such thing as a bad idea. Now, we always have to make choices. That's saying that this was like, yeah, great, everyone's running off and coming up with all sorts of stuff. There's a clear strategy, there's a clear framework, and you let people play within that whilst also empowering them to have the confidence in what they do. And that was how we kind of turned it around into this team that was just, in the end, and I recently, not that long ago, went back to Japan, having been gone for 2 years. I went earlier this year, and 30 of my old team came out. We all had dinner together and stuff like that, which I really didn't expect. But it was such a great experience in such a challenging kind of culture and language as well. It's not the easiest language in the world to learn. As much as I tried, I would never going to say I was proficient.
But you got by.
Yeah, you learn to get by. You have to. I mean, there's a lot of translation for the difficult stuff, but I think it's also, and again, that's where EQ starts to really come into it, is it doesn't matter the culture and that kind of stuff. it's that sense of how people are reacting, and you can see that in body language. You can see the way that people are saying stuff, or that, there's so many cues that you can pick up on, and you just have to explore those. You be inquisitive, like, hey, are you okay? Are you all right? Is
Yeah.
that something that, and that's quite a new thing. And I think the other one for me, and this was a big one for me, was that was the first time I really talked about my dyslexia. So I'd never talked about that before. And we were talking about, celebrating everyone's diversity and their differences and stuff like that. And one of the team challenged me, said, well, you said you were dyslexic. Why don't you tell anyone? And it was one of those things. It's like, you have to then be a lot more vulnerable. You've got to put yourself, when I remember when just before the games, it was 11 days before the games, when the organizing committee decided to cancel spectators. So imagine we'd been working up to a games that was essentially around millions of tickets and people coming, to then and lots of drinks to be sold all over the place. And then 11 days out, they say, no, we're not going to take the risk. There's no spectators. So it's going to be empty stadiums. And I remember that immediately having a heads up that was going to be, and having a team meeting, which was all on Zoom the next morning. And I just took a picture. I just put up a photo of a small child in black and white, kind of crunched in a corner, in a ball. And I just said to them, this is how I felt last night when I got the news. And being open and honest about that, said, look, it hurts, it crushes, but we're still going to get up. We still got to go and do this. We've still got, the best part, 20,000 athletes that need drinking and looking after and stuff like that. And they've come here, and this is their games. This is all what it's about. So it's about having that ability to kind of not own, but at least be honest about what the situation is. And I think so many times we're not honest these days about how things are, that we just mindlessly keep running. It's like, you know what? Things are tough. I get it. Let's take a moment to just recognize that things suck sometimes. And then you can move on from it. I think if you don't recognize that, and you're not open enough to kind of see that, then I think people don't trust you. And I think trust and honesty and those kind of things are such core values to me, that why would I expect anyone else to do it? And I think that's the same. I think that comes all the way through my life, is just, actually, this is a really important message, because people weren't always honest and upfront with me. So therefore, everything that I learned that I didn't like in life, I need to try and put right.
So what was the reaction of the team when you told them there's not going to be any spectators?
It was tough. I mean, we'd always talked about it because we had contingency plans, and it wasn't A, B, and C. I think we'd gone through the entirety of the alphabet by the time there was contingency plans for every different part of the games, from operations to marketing to commercial to, there was so many contingency plans. So it wasn't like it was new, wasn't new, it was potential. And obviously for one of the teams that did this, which was the hospitality team and that kind of stuff, okay, we needed to fix that. But I remember kind of saying, look, I want you all guys to take some time. Just take today. Do you know what? We're locked up inside. We don't know what's going on. We're wearing masks. It was that kind of moment, like, just take the day. You know what? And take a bit of time. And it was tough. I mean, some of them did bounce back quicker than others, but that's the nature of people. Some people will take a little bit more time to think it through, to see what the impact is on them. And I open the door, like, if any of you want to talk to me about this, or you're worried about what's happening. And remember, at this point, they're also then trying to work about what's afterwards, because after the games, what do you do? That's the hardest part of the games. Is a lot of people work 4 years up to it, and then suddenly afterwards they're like, great, the games are over, your phone stops ringing, and you don't know what you're doing next. So I tried to focus a lot of that in the last few months, as to getting people to know what was happening afterwards, so they could forget about that and focus on the day. And it worked out well. I wouldn't say I got it perfect in any stretch of the imagination, and definitely had a lot of times I sat with my head in my hands going, really, can we take any more? Can we take any more? Um, so, so yeah, the reaction of the team. And again, it's just having that kind of building up the months or the year before, that psychological safety that people can share. Like you can say, hey, you know what? I'm having a bad day and I'm sorry, but this kind of sucks. And it's like, yeah, you can say that. And if you don't, you crush it all down. You try and power through the moments with like, yeah, let's go and do this. And there's motivational and there's leadership in so many different ways. And I've dealt with people who did that. It's just like, no, come on, we're going to keep going. It's like, you can't just keep doing that. And that's where you see burnout these days. And, you know, all these kind of things is there's got to be this balance, this healthy balance in doing it.
I can't imagine what it would be like to try to keep a team motivated in that year and months after, like when it was supposed to happen, and then it drags on after, and still while it's dragging on, not knowing what the final outcome was going to be, because nobody knew when, if ever, we'd get back to normal, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And but, you know, it's always those things, and it's a real cliche, but you know, you learn the most from some of the hardest moments. So, and that is where you do, and I think that's the other one, is where you with people around you. And again, when we talk about high performing teams, and you can look in, you know, the history of the SAS or the Navy SEALs and how they adapt to those kind of situations, and it is about that trust. And Simon Sinek always does this for the Navy SEALs. He always talks about, do I trust you with my life and my wife? I'm always like, if you can get past that, that's brilliant. I'm like, and I think that's where you get into that high performing team. Is it's not, you build the teams up over time, and you get that moment where you can share stuff and you can build those moments. I was very fortunate in all of the games editions and previous to that, the teams that I built always have and still are very well connected, because they always check in with each other and stuff like that, because that's what we taught each other to do, check in, because whatever the job is, we need all of us to operate as one, and that means you've got to look after everyone, and you've got to deal with problems straight out the door. And I think that's by building that over time, when things do go wrong, and they do, and I have a million stories of potential bombs and things like this, and times you're like, that's where you find out that you've got the people in the right places, because you've kind of road tested them. They've been battle tested, and they're not saying these are young people. You know, they've never been through this, so you've got to be able to put the arm around them at the right time and go, hey, that's good, we got this. So it is a phenomenal way that you can just, and the bit for me is the shared values piece, the shared values and the shared objectives. Is if you have individuals that just are off on their own way doing their own thing, it's not going to work. And in this day and age, and I think so much more in the future, is the success will be built on relationships and partnerships that have those values, those common objectives and common value bases, because that will be where it comes together.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, because, you know, it was not only high pressure, and it was not only during the pandemic, which we hope we don't have to experience again, but recognizing that the real key is that common ground, the common values, and that everybody buys into the same vision and value, and then you can go forward from there. And then the trust, right, is really what I'm hearing from you. Japan would have been your most successful Olympics with Coke?
Oh yeah, by a country mile. Well, I mean, different successes, I guess, different pieces of the puzzle. I guess the Tokyo one was where it all came together. We put all the metrics, we put all the strategies, and it did come together, even with a pandemic thrown at us. And that just shows you the kind of thinking that goes behind the strategy and the direction. That even with a curveball, you know, I'm not saying that all of it stayed on, but a good 70% of it still delivered on target. So I think that's Yeah, so by far that was one. And I think that was why I kind of got to a point when, right, okay, I think I've had enough of this. I'm tapping out. I'm tapping out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you always worry that, like, can I get any better than what I just had? Like, you don't want to tempt fate, but at the same time, was there anything left there that you felt was undone for you?
No, I don't think so, because it was that kind of culmination, I guess, of multiple games, multiple experience, the people you have around you, the culture. It's that very unique moment, and I think you never can replicate that. And I've know that in other places I've tried to go, right, just if I get the same people and I do this the same thing, but in a different culture, in a different country, it'll be the same. Actually, no, that's not wrong. You each time you have to be curious to understand the landscape, understand what's going on, understand how people engage with different things, even with teams and things like that. So yeah, I definitely think that was, and I think that was probably what part of my reason is to go, you know what, I've kind of got to a point where I'm like, okay, I've ticked this. I think I'm done. That got the best out of me for that. Now I probably wanted to find a different challenge, and that's the fun bit,
Yeah.
or the slightly uncomfortable bit, which I think David Bowie always says it, like, as soon if you're too comfortable, you're in the wrong place, and you
Yeah.
need to just go out until your feet can't touch the ground, and you're just in that uncomfortable thing, and that's where you're going to get the best out of you. And it's that constant pushing that gets better innovation, gets better ideas, gets builds better relationships. Is that constant kind of like, actually, if I'm comfortable, I'm uncomfortable.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about what you've done from a marketer's perspective, you're not only marketing a product, but and dealing with consumers, you're also internally dealing with sort of reporting up to with the results, as well as I, the biggest event in the world, the Olympics, in diversity, different cultures, and bringing all of that together for a really intense 21 days, is it?
Yeah.
And it's like kind of all of those, the highest box in all of those categories, event marketing and marketing overall, diversity and things that are more green. And like, I to think about that all at once kind of makes my head explode a little bit. But I mean, I guess you kind of worked up to that somewhat, but you know,
Yeah.
did they measure success the way
Oh,
you did prior to you getting there?
no. So that was always the challenge. I remember the at the time he wasn't the CFO of Coke, but he is now, saying to me in Asia go when I landed in Tokyo, he said, James, you've got to work out. We need to know how this delivers return on investment, which after a 92-year history was kind of a bit of a tall order.
Yeah.
So it had never been done before. I don't know if it's been done to the same level today, but literally dollar for dollar, we knew what happened, where it went, all this kind of stuff. And I remember presenting to the leadership, the C-suite, and the leadership team, and them just going, this is how we do it. And I think that comes from having it also, and one of the things where we talk about neurodiversity is that ability for me to holistically be able to look across the top and go, actually, can you see that this does that? But the trick is then taking people on that journey to go, do you realize that this does that? Because not everyone makes that connection. So
Yeah.
you've got to be able to put it in a way that everyone does buy into a vision, but then also know that you're going to be down in the weeds with people when that happens. And that was always my mantra. I mean, even when we did stuff like, we did the torch relay in Japan, every now and again, I had a torch relay director, the job I'd done in London. And there's always that, you go do it, it's your relay. But as long as you allow me to come along, and I've got to run along the side of the road, I've got to hand down Cokes every now and again, because that's the bit you've got to love, is you've got to get down and dirty in the weeds with all of it and enjoy that, because that's what it is. It's like a lot of the stuff I do now definitely is down getting involved in every part of a business, and that's kind of also exciting, because I think too many times do we get caught up in the lofty pieces at the top and go, oh yeah, I've just built a strategy and you guys all do this, and it's a fine, we'll cut the team by 10% because it's a number. And we need to have a better understanding of that and a better engagement of that, because I think that's what good leaders do.
Yeah.
I think.
Because it's connecting the dots between all of the things.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're not always connecting the dots, then, you have to understand we can cut the team by 10%. Okay, but what dots don't get connected because you're cutting it by 10%? Like that's what people need to understand, right?
Yeah. And it's also speaking to the people that actually impacts them, because they know what's going on. So I do this a lot of times when I go into a business, or sometime you go around and you interview everyone that's involved in the business at whatever level, to go, actually, what do you think? You do this job. I mean, I do love the world of consultants these days, or the big four who come into businesses and go, right, we know what to do, and they come up with some grand plan that they've been paid an awful lot of money to do, but they don't really know the business.
Yeah.
And so actually you're better off going down to the person in the shop, or the factory, or whatever it is, and ask them what they think. And you can go, hey, look, what do you think? How could we make this better for you? And that's sometimes where you're going to get the best answers, because there's so many ways that sometimes goes, oh, well, you sure you can do that? And then you realize that actually that really doesn't work. And I think, and again, that's being good enough to know to ask people, being curious to understand how they do it. And I sadly get kind of really excited about this kind of stuff. Like I love going to places and understanding how they do. So, well, man, this is brilliant. And the amount of people who just say, all you do is ask questions. And I'm like, yeah, because I'm kind of interested. Like, I'm really interested in what you do and what makes you tick and stuff like that. So I think that's something I enjoy.
And I think too, it's along the line of talking to the person who actually does the job, is not listening to the people who give you the great testimonials, but listening to the people who are your critics, because that's where the most innovation is going to happen, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree with that, because if you just surround yourself with people and it becomes yet an echo chamber of people saying, well, this is great, this is what we're doing, you're like, nah, I'm in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Because you need to have, and that's also those difficult decisions. And I think, again, that's part of coming back to the high performing team piece, is being able to have those difficult discussions about topics that people don't want to talk about, but you need to have them on the table so you can do it. But you do it in a professional way, not in a personal way. You do it in a way that's designed to help people, not to criticize or to put down and stuff like that. And the amount of times I've had difficult conversations with people, if I'll say, have a difficult conversation with me. Tell me. If you don't tell me that I'm doing something wrong, I don't know. And that's the irony of a lot of the working worlds these days. Most people, they come in, they're given, here's your job, and no one tells them what to do. And we never set out expectations. And I did this recently with a founder and CEO, and I was like, okay, let's talk about expectations. How do you want to work? Like, this is what I expect from you, and this is what you expect from me. And just doing that, it takes 5-10 minutes, just takes away probably about 20% frustration in those early days about how you operate. And little things like that just really can make the relationship easier, because you're more aware. I did this with someone recently. They would send me these massive documents and lots of written words and stuff like that. I was just like, look, I'm just going to be honest with you. I hate long documents. I'm dyslexic, so I hate it. And it's on a screen, so it's even harder. I said, as long as you're okay with me cut and pasting it into Chat GPT and asking for a summary, then you're good. Or you can just do it because it's probably quicker for you to just put it into bullet points. And again, next meeting, bang, done.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is so much easier. And I think rather than not saying anything or not talking about that or not being open that, by the way, it's going to take me a bit longer to read something, then people know and they can adjust to it, because no, there aren't that many 100% nasty people in the world. Most people are kind and want to help.
Listen, we all have our things that make us different. And, I like to try to focus on the things that make me different because of my ADHD. And I'm sure it's not that different from you, because you look at things opposite, probably the same way I do, which is your incredible problem solving skills or creativity and innovation. What kind of a leader are you if you don't learn to work with somebody that has these different abilities, right? Because it's not just in your brain. There's physical abilities that are different. A client of ours once called it diffability, because everybody has different abilities, and whether that's brain or physical, or it doesn't matter what it is. And so if there is someone that you work with or someone you report to that's going, well, I don't care how you do it, just get it done and read it or whatever, then maybe that's where you start.
And that's the thing. And you look at things, and we've got so many, whether it's Myers-Briggs or whatever it is, or whether we're in the blue, the red, the red or the yellow or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's where you get, like you said at the beginning, like, people are they born to do one or the other? Well, not necessarily. They're going to lean into one of them. If someone else is, there are friends of mine that love Excel. And I have to say, when I talk to some of the accountants and finance people, I love watching them. Literally, they're like, I always call them like orchid, like musicians, because they dance through an Excel.
Yeah.
They make it dance and they make it come to life. And I just sit there like a kid, just like, wow, you can do that. But then you made it do that. Oh my God, I've been doing that myself for years.
It's like watching a magician almost, right?
Exactly. And it's I think it's lovely to watch. I love watching people who love doing what they do. And it's the same way in PowerPoint or something like that, or people that are creating stuff. There's that piece. And the moment you get that all in a room and they're all comfortable to talk out and go, well, actually, I don't get this. I think that's where it's the most rewarding thing you can have, is where you get that as to a melting pot of people that are happy to chuck ideas all over the place. And that's where you get great innovation.
So where are you focusing your time now?
That's a great question. I guess since I left, which is probably 2 years ago, and decided to come back to the UK, part of that was to be around for my mum and stuff like that. So I'm planning out, I'm working through the next phase of my career, and I guess that's trying to work out where's the best use of my experience, time, effort, that kind of stuff to help. And that has taken me down some investment side. So some investments that I do, some startup worlds that I think are great ideas that can make a lot of difference in the world. And I think we've got to be striving to do that. You've got to have greater impact for society on whatever levels. I've done a bit of teaching because I love teaching. I taught a master's for a little while. I might go back to do that. So I love kind of the idea of focusing on the next generation. How do we support the next generation? Because in fairness, in our childhood, things were a little bit easier than they are today for the next generation. So how do you impart that? And also, I love listening to young people. So I kind of get a buzz out of that.
Okay, so we had it easier in what way? How was that? I'm curious.
I don't think it was as complicated. So, just the little things of phones, the amount of TV channels, technology. So whilst that gives us a bunch of positive stuff, and I think AI is a phenomenal addition to it, And it still blows my mind. And I have worked with a bunch of startups that focus a lot on AI and work in boards and stuff like that. And how do we help? But I just think it was simpler. Things were just a little bit easier. There wasn't video games or the latest this or the latest that, and you're trying to keep up with everything that's going on, and social media, and just there's so much. I also don't think we had as much knowledge as we do globally about what's going on in the rest of the world.
Sure.
The speed of information is just insane,
Yeah.
and and it's gone. And 1 minute a story happened an hour ago, and suddenly it's gone an hour because something else has happened. So I just think lives were a little bit easier. Communication was easier. You either picked up the phone or 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 you went and spoke to someone. It was as simple as that. There wasn't email, there wasn't, all the other 1,500 different ways. I've lost count of how many different ways you engage with it. Depending on my nieces or nephews, it's Snapchat, or if it's someone else, if it's friends, if it's in Japan, my friends in Japan, it's a different line. So you're constantly trying to work out which is the mode of communication. So I think that's why it's harder. And don't get me wrong, I think it's all good, but I think that's probably harder to navigate. It's easier for us to shut off than some of the younger generations, because it's just they're being bamboozled with just so much stuff.
But
Um,
they would have been born with phones in their hand, though, right?
well, some of them these days, I do
But
wonder.
Gen
I
Z,
mean,
Gen Alpha probably
Gen
would.
Alpha, Gen Alpha and Gen Z, definitely, because they're starting to build, they're calling it the kind of anxiety generation, because there's so much going on, and the FOMO and all this kind of stuff, that had you keep up with it. And I think there's a point where you can't. So I definitely think with that, and I think it changes. I definitely the current thinking on Gen Alpha is it's going to be, as it is for every generation, it's better than all of the ones preceding it. So it learns from the ones that have got it wrong. So whether the millennials, so Gen Z learned from the millennials, the Gen Alpha's learning from Gen Z, and I think what comes out of it is some really good, smart stuff, and it's tapping into that earlier so it can have the positive impacts we all need it to have. And it's a bit like choice. It's choice, and I was talking to someone recently about sustainable solutions. For Gen Alpha and Gen Z, that's not a choice, that's a requirement. Whereas the older generations and above is kind of like, oh, is it more expensive, isn't it? Do I care? It's a slightly different decision making process. And we do that with a lot of the brands that I'm working with, and it's kind of like, actually, it's the younger generation that need it, and we need to protect all of this stuff for them as well. So I think yeah, so I don't think it's easy. They're also having to deal with everything that we've done to kind of mess up the world.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, I think it's what every generation deals with from the one before, right? I mean, I'm just thinking about, so their brains have a better ability to deal with the multimedia, phones, iPads, computers, social media, the different social media channels, you know, creating content. Because, when I think about when I was a kid, we were thrown outside and stay out all day. Like, I'm cleaning the house, and you're playing Red Rover where you're actually smashing into each other, or you're throwing lawn darts at each other. I mean, it was simple. The only thing we had to worry about was our parents screaming at us out the door when the streetlights came on.
Yeah. If you
That's
weren't home on time and that was when the streetlights came on, you were in trouble.
And that's it. That's all. So when I think about, what kids deal with today, now some of them maybe don't go out as much because they're on video games, but they're easily reachable all the
Yeah.
time. And
Yeah.
it's always being on, right? So it's an accountability thing. So I don't know. They're just maybe better able to do that. I'm not sure, but it's interesting just how we look at different generations, and also how they look at us. And I know a lot of the younger ones maybe look at us and say, yeah, you kind of screwed up the planet. But that started to happen long before us.
Yeah, that's true. We didn't start that trend. That was way, but And you're exactly right. It was interesting you just said there, you said it's kind of always on for them.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the piece that we see to start to play out in the anxiety and some of the mental health stuff that's come through, is it is, and that's across generations, is it is feels as though it's always on.
Yeah.
Like it does feel as though, you know, years ago, I remember weekends being so sacred. Like they were just, that was it. You were done and off you went. And now I think it's just kind of merged across into one thing. And I think it is always on. And I think it becomes harder and harder to balance that. You're right. I think the younger generation will, but all they know is always on.
It's true.
So,
It's true. I mean, I remember Friday nights, planning for Friday nights was the best.
yes. So cool. And now everyone knows then Thursday's a new Friday. Now Wednesday's a new Thursday. It's like, look, I'm confused. What day of the week am I supposed to go out?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So if you could, so you've done some investment in some cool companies and you have a consulting company where you can go in and coach for high performing teams or whatever it is. Would you say you prefer sport or it's anything?
I'm kind of agnostic. I think I have a passion for sport and I'm agnostic about sport as well. For me, for sport, it's about how do we get sport to do more good in the world. So I love sport. It's such an amazing passion, probably one of the most powerful ones. And I just at the moment trying to help people make the balance between money, politics, and this kind of stuff versus the common things that sport gives you, those kind of values of teamship, trying hard, effort, focus, all these kind of things, and health. And I think for me, it's about trying to rebalance that a little bit more because there's a lot of money that gets caught up into that. And I don't think it's for the right reasons always. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger. The check keeps getting bigger and bigger. So, but then in businesses, and again, it's like some of the startups, all of them are all about how do you take something like one of them is milk. We do this oat milk, which is we take water out of it, and actually it's better for the planet. It still tastes great. It's better for your pocket. You know, that's kind of things where it's solving a problem that I think that does have a positive impact. So for me, it doesn't matter what it is. It's what's the problem are we trying to solve,
Yeah.
and then what are we trying to do that, and how do we make this? And I think there's always been this kind of moment where you can't do good and make money. The two are separate. But actually, I disagree. I think the two are entwined, and I think that's what they have to be as we move forward. And we come back to consumers, and we can Gen Z and Gen Alpha will demand that. And I think whether that's a business, whether that's tech, whether that's sport, it's about how do you get that all to be better and connect those dots. And it comes down to, as I say, values and partnerships and relationships.
And
And
I think
once you,
they do actually expect that now.
yeah, yeah. I just don't think everyone else realizes that.
It could be. It could be. My brain doesn't know what age it is, so I tend to migrate towards, when I'm on the different social media platforms, what Gen Z and what Gen Alpha are talking about. Uh,
Yeah.
as long as they're not disrespecting Gen X. But I personally get along really well with Gen Z. Don't know why. There's a lot of synergy in sort of how we look at the world as a generation. I don't know if I'm a well represented Gen X, but it's just, I don't know, maybe it depends how old you are. I'm not sure, but I think that there is a commonality between the generations, and I think maybe all will agree that we have to start looking at what we do in business as part of our values. And like, we can't just park our values and what we believe in at the door and go into a company that's causing all kinds of problems, whether it's in the environment or a lot of waste or whatever it is, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's an exciting time for you, though, because you have all this opportunity in front of you.
Yeah, I'm quite lucky. I do. I fundamentally appreciate that I'm quite lucky, and it is exciting. And whilst it is nerve-wracking, having gone from 16 years of a corporate career to have moments of like, so what am I doing now? So, but that's the kind of exciting piece because if you do it for the right reasons and that's what's driving you, and you connect with the right people and you speak to the right people and you treat people the right way and all this kind of stuff, eventually good things kind of come to fruition. That's always been my belief. And I think the harder you work at something, as long as you're working hard and you're doing stuff and that you enjoy do it, I think like you were saying, like if you're going to do something and do it so that you enjoy it. And I think that's the perfect kind of thing. I think there was a lot of there's a lot of things I learned in Japan about those kind of ways that they do stuff, about having your purpose, doing something you love, doing something, that makes a difference, and that keeps you financially rewarded. So it's a great kind of, I think that's the kind of mantra. So who knows where it'll be,
Yeah.
or where it'll take me.
Last question. If you could have anyone, dead or alive, and you had your own late night talk show,
Oof.
who would your first guest be?
Ooh. Wow. That's a really tough question.
Some people say Winston Churchill. Some people say God. People have said God. People have said, so many. Oh, someone said Bugs Bunny.
Interesting. Actually, Walt Disney would be a great one, to be honest. I'd love to kind of sit down because Walt Disney, and he kind of did the whole existential flex. So, which when I left Coke, I always talked about doing this existential flex, which was, okay, I'm leaving Coke to go and do something very different, but still with the same kind of mindset towards it and applying it somewhere else. And he did that with cartoons, and then with the kind of the theme parks and stuff like that. So I think it would probably be someone like that or someone along the lines of Steve Jobs, just because of the way that they took something and created something that will be iconic forever, and knowing they did it in such a way. So yeah, it'd be one of those two, I think. And I'd probably go with Walt Disney just because, yeah, because I don't think I saw, I guess we all saw Steve Jobs, whereas Walt Disney I didn't kind of really see.
Yeah. And it's he was ahead of his time.
Yeah, like a country mile.
Yeah.
And kept driving it and built success and did it on great values. Do you know what I mean? It was just, and now you see where Disney is now. I mean, sheesh,
I know.
think of where it is now. And the current CEO just invested in Angel City, the women's football team, which is great. I'm a big fan of people who support women's sport. So, yeah, I mean, look at that for a legacy. That's a great one. Yeah, he's on my talk show, definitely.
And the first guest.
Yeah, exactly. He might be my only guest.
Awesome. Thank you so much today. We've learned so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you very much for having me.